This movie opens with publications flashes. Suzanne Moretto introduces herself as Suzanne Stone, being her name before she got married. She talks about how she loves the name Moretto as much as she loved her husband, Larry. She also talks about how her association with her husband's family has helped her professional career as a media personnel. In an interview with Janice, Larry's sister, she tells him that at a time at the Moretto's restaurant, some girls walk in from the heavy downpour outside, and one of the girls, who happened to be Suzanne, catches the attention of Larry. Janice says she does not understand why it has to be Suzanne, because there were other girls that were interested in him and always showed him whenever they came to watch Larry play with his band at the restaurant. Janice talks about how she always tries to shift his focus away from Suzanne to other hot girls that liked him. But Larry always maintained his ground on liking Suzanne and how he sees her so pure and lovely. Janice talks about how Suzanne made comments about her face while Larry was there, telling her to see a plastic surgeon, of course, which she doesn't like. Larry later makes comments and says Suzanne will be the next Barbara Walters and revels in her brilliance. Janice says it was at this moment she knew that he was a goner, and she could not do much about it. Suzanne continues her recordings and talks about people's lifestyle and talks about how she knows what she wants to be. It happens that she's always wanted to see herself on TV. This idea might probably be hinged on the fact that right from her early years, Suzanne's father has always recorded her and made her watch herself live on the television. All these have been a TV show after all. Laura TV show. At the show, Mr. Stone talks about how they didn't think too much of the relationship between Suzanne and Larry, and says he advised her not to get too involved with Larry, in case his child might be mixed up in some mafia deals. He apologizes to Joe, Larry's father, who is also in the interview. Joe also talks about how Larry always talks good about Suzanne, and how Larry sold his drums and got married to Suzanne. Faye Stone, Suzanne's sister, also at the interview, talks about the wedding, saying the veil Suzanne wore was an exact replica of one used by Maria Shriver for her wedding, which Suzanne copied from a magazine. A cutscene to Janice where she says that Suzanne designed the wedding rings herself, describing the rings as round and gold. Mrs. Stone then talks about the postcards they receive every day from Suzanne, claiming that she and Larry are on their honeymoon. What surprises them is the fact that they went to Florida because Suzanne is not a fan of a beach, but Larry was very much into boating and fishing, and she probably wants to make him happy by doing so. Larry wakes up from his sleep and starts calling out for Suzanne. She walks into the bedroom and asks if he misses her. Suzanne climbs onto the bed and starts kissing Larry. When Larry and Suzanne got back from their honeymoon, they were both looking radiant, as described by Mr. and Mrs. Stone, saying it must have been a very successful honeymoon. Joe comments and says Larry used the money he saved up for his college to make a down payment for a condo at the Heights, and he also bought Suzanne a Mustang car. Another cutscene to Janice's interview. She describes how fast Larry changed since he got married to Suzanne. She says so suddenly, likening it to him moving from Van Halen to Jerry Vale overnight. She describes Suzanne as someone who has no taste. Flashback to when Larry and Suzanne got back from their honeymoon. The two families came to see them and welcome them home. Suzanne serves them a meal called barquettes with leek chiffonade, claiming it is the same dish that was served in Johnny Carson's favorite restaurant in Hollywood, which is probably why Janice says she has no taste. After the meal, the family gathered in the living room to have a chat. Larry tries to lighten the mood by complimenting the food, and everyone laughs. Suzanne then mentions that she is planning on starting an exercise class in order to lose a few pounds. Joe, surprised, asks what part of her body she wants to reduce. Her feet. Larry's mother then laughs. Suzanne then replies that the camera adds 5 extra pounds to an individual on television. Janice, using exercise as an excuse, stands up to leave, saying she has a rehearsal in Norwalk. Mrs. Moretto mentions that Janice has a job in the Ice Valleys, a musical band, and they are going on tour in September. Everyone is happy for her. Janice, while explaining her part in the band, was cut short by her brother, Larry, who walks over to where Suzanne is sitting, claiming they also have an announcement to make. The parents, showing signs of immense joy, happiness and excitement, thought Suzanne was pregnant, but Suzanne quickly cuts short their happiness by saying she is not pregnant. Larry then announces that Suzanne has gotten a job at one TV station, which basically is a cable station, where she happens to be the first woman to be hired. Everybody claps as they seem happy about this, except Janice, who looks at them scornfully. Another cutscene to Mrs. Moretto buying groceries at the usual place. Sal, the store owner, helps Mrs. Moretto carry her groceries to the car. Sal asks about the newlyweds and she answers saying they are fine. Sal then asks if she likes the barquettes. Mrs. Moretto doesn't understand what he means. Sal then explains that Suzanne showed him the recipe and he followed it to make the barquettes with the leek chiffonade, even though they have never done it before. It becomes obvious to her that Suzanne didn't cook it herself. Back to the television interview. Mrs. Moretto claims she didn't tell anyone that Suzanne couldn't cook, saying there are worse crimes than that. In the same vein, a lady talks about Suzanne and her optimism for big dreams and aspirations. She reveals that Suzanne was always ready to make good use of opportunities, and that was why she agreed to go to Florida with Larry, because she plans to attend a television conference going on at that same time right there in Florida, which of course Larry had no idea about. Meanwhile, as Larry was enjoying his boat rides, Suzanne was meeting up with television dignitaries who she hoped to convince in order to get her shot on the big stage. Eventually, none of her plans seems to make waves. One particular dignitary of whom she usually watches his shows also tries to manipulate her into sleeping with him over a drink and promises to make her dreams come true. It is after this that she met Larry back in the room. Later on, Suzanne walks into the local cable station and presents herself as the messenger that they need there and promises them to be very effective if she is employed there. She later starts to work at the WEN cable station in the hopes of climbing the network ladder. Through relentless persistence, her boss eventually promotes her to doing the station's evening weather report, which she does well at, and the audience all look forward to hearing her give the weather reports each time. At a later time, Suzanne goes to a local school to recruit subjects for a documentary she is producing, Teens Speak Out, that focuses on various issues teenagers are facing like education, peer pressure, and the likes. Suzanne immediately attracts two delinquents, Jimmy Ement and Russell Hines, who seem sexually attracted to her. Suzanne then asks them who has been on television before, to which a girl named Lydia Mertz responds to, making Suzanne get interested in her. While she talks, they make some noise and Russell tries to look up her skirt. Just then, the teacher walks in and makes everyone, including Russell, get back to a proper decorum. Larry begins pressuring Suzanne to give up her career in favor of helping out at the restaurant and starting a family with him. Larry tables all the ideas he had been working for the restaurant and was hoping Suzanne, with her experience in television production, might help in the aspects of making shows once a week, to which Suzanne doesn't seem to be moved. As he becomes more persistent, Suzanne sees him as an impediment to her desired future and immediately begins plotting his murder. She seduces Jimmy and convinces him to murder Larry by falsely claiming abuse and promising she and Jimmy will have a future together in California once Larry is dead. She also manipulates Lydia into procuring a gun. One night while Suzanne delivers the evening weather report, Jimmy and Russell break into the Moretto's condo, and Jimmy shoots Larry to death after Russell collects his wristwatch and chain. Though Larry's death is ruled the result of a botched burglary, the police stumble across a Teens Speak Out clip of Suzanne at their school, which points to her sexual involvement with Jimmy. The teens are arrested and connected to the crime scene. Lydia makes a deal with the police to converse with Suzanne while wearing a wire, and Suzanne unwittingly reveals her hand in the murder. However, despite this damning evidence, Suzanne argues that the police resorted to entrapment and is released on bail. All the charges against Suzanne are dropped. Basking in the media spotlight, however, Suzanne fabricates a story about Larry. The reporters outside of the courtroom asks her to say something, and she says she is happy to live in a country where life, liberty, and other things still stand for something. When asked what she plans to do next, Suzanne says she is going home and will go walk her dog. When also asked if she used the kids, Jimmy, Russell, and Lydia, to kill her husband, she replies saying the reason she didn't want to say anything about it was because Larry got acquainted with Jimmy and Russell behind her back, and they both become Larry's suppliers of drug. But they had issues along the line, which eventually led to them killing Larry. So, Larry, being a cocaine addict, was murdered by Jimmy and Russell, his purported dealers. This revelation, however, doesn't sit well with Joe, as he was seen smashing the television with a baseball bat after hearing Suzanne's comments to the press. Jimmy and Russell are sentenced to life in prison. Russell gets his sentence reduced, while Lydia is released on probation. Meanwhile, Larry's father, Joe, realizes Suzanne was behind his son's death, and Joe made an arrangement with one of his mafia connections to have her murdered. A hitman lures Suzanne away from her home by posing as a movie studio executive, kills her, and conceals her body beneath a frozen lake which probably belongs to the Moretto family. Lydia tells her side of the story in a televised interview, giving every single detail of how the event went down, including how her, Jimmy, and Russell. This singular act of Lydia gains national attention, which in turn makes Lydia a celebrity. Lydia ends her story with Suzanne's advice to her, which says, "You are not really anybody in America unless you are on television, or what is the point of doing anything worthwhile if nobody is watching?" After all the hustle and bustle, Janice, Larry's sister who always hated Suzanne, practices her figure skating on the frozen lake where Suzanne's corpse lies, and no one even knows she is there, not even Janice herself. Can you believe that this was actually based on the true story of Pamela Smart? The movie is based on a 1992 novel of the same name, was itself inspired by a real-life crime in the 1990s. That's incredibly insane, but people do crazy things to get famous or in front of television.
Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like. It really helps the channel.